America is fighting on two fronts. At home, it's inflation and rising prices. Abroad, it's helping Ukrainians defend their democracy and feeding those who are left hungry around the world because Russian atrocities exist. Putin's war has cut off critical sources of food.
That was U.S. President Joe Biden there declaring that America is at war with inflation and rising consumer prices. And that, of course, is not news to anyone. And just when most of the world was recovering from the economic downturn caused by the pandemic, Vladimir Putin launched his invasion of Ukraine. And that new disruption reversed the recovery in some places, and it pushed up the cost of living practically everywhere. Consider your grocery bill. Ukraine and Russia are the breadbaskets for much of the world, but there's little farming being done near the front lines. That means prices for wheat, barley, corn, they've skyrocketed. And a spike in gas and oil prices has pushed up heating bills. Europe in particular has come to depend heavily on Russian gas. I'll give you an example. Berlin here, the German capital, heats and powers with natural gas. 95% of it comes from Russia. And motorists across Europe, they are feeling the pinch at the pump. You will pay about €2 per liter when you fill up your tank. Now that converts to about $10 per gallon. The true extent of these shockwaves, well, it depends on how long the war in Ukraine lasts and the scale of the devastation and the disruption that it causes. That depends on this man right here, Vladimir Putin. So far, there are no signs that he will call for a halt to his invasion anytime soon. Here in Germany, the number of people going to food pantries, for example, it has risen dramatically. Now, some are refugees from Ukraine, while others are people who simply no longer can afford to buy everyday groceries.
Give me a couple of bananas for the little ones. Thank you. There are still plenty of bananas and bread rolls at noon at this Berlin food pantry. The Tafel Food Bank volunteers are busy, and the food goes quickly. 350 households receive food at this pantry each week. And more have been coming since the Ukraine war. The food must be divided up carefully. You have to think about it a bit more, a lot more, and also about Ukraine. There's less and less food. Because of the war in Ukraine, we get even less food. The Tafel organization runs 350 food pantries throughout Germany. In some places, demand for food has doubled in recent months. Even people who have jobs and a regular income often can't even afford to pay for basic needs. Nowadays, everything's getting cleared out as food is in short supply. Everything is. More and more people are registering for the pantry that Irmgard Shadak manages. Another family fleeing Ukraine has just arrived. But we also increasingly have people who live here, who have to budget thanks to the inflationary development in food prices. We have many retired people here. We have many families with several children. The system only works if supermarkets donate food, but this is on the decline. Food is already in short supply and is seldom donated to food banks. Flour and cooking oil are illusory. We can only dream of them. We don't get any flour, no oil, as even shoppers are not getting them in the stores right now. Sunflower oil, flour, and rice are in short supply in Germany, and prices have shot up. People have been building up their own reserves. Berlin's food pantries are worried about the future.
Well, for more, I want to turn now to Rudiger Bachmann. He is a professor of economics at the University of Notre Dame in Indiana in the U.S. Professor, it's good to see you this Friday evening here. Let's go back in time a little bit, if we could. Evening. Let's go back to February 23rd, right before the war in Ukraine began. We were already seeing inflation on both sides of the Atlantic, for example. If there had not been a war at all, would we be sitting here tonight talking about these record high inflation rates that we're seeing?
Yes, I believe so. Probably not quite as much. So there is an impact of the war on inflation. But even just having Putin threatening a war drove up energy prices. And sort of as long as this situation would have festered on, energy prices and food prices would have gone up. To a certain extent, the fact that we see these record high prices is basically an expression of the fact that the world, and Europe in particular, has gotten poorer through two effects. One, through a pandemic that has still scarred the economy. We still see China not being able to deliver to sort of keep its weight in the world economy, and then plus on top of everything, the food and energy prices through the Ukrainian crisis. Those are the two combinations where we've just gotten poorer, and inflation is an expression of that.
And you say we've gotten poorer. One reason is because we just can't get all of the goods produced in China as quickly as we could before the pandemic. Are we being forced?
That is one effect, yes.
One effect. Are we being forced, though, into a correction here? Because those goods are being made in China because they're not being made here. And, you know, we went through decades with jobs being cut here in Europe and in the United States. Are we seeing now a reverse in that? Are we going to be talking about now domestic supply chains being reestablished, or are we going to be talking about manufacturing reemerging in the West?
I think this will be part of the equation, although this will take long. This is not a short-term solution, quite frankly. A short-term solution might be thinking about lowering some barriers to trade, although it is what it is. The problem is, in China, we still have a raging pandemic. There's no solution on by the Chinese in sight. Whether they let it run, the economy will collapse or will be in dire straits. Whether they don't have a vaccination, so if they keep doing their lockdowns, that won't help economically. So it's really a dire picture here, because I don't see an exit option. How is China ever going to exit from this pandemic? And as long as that is not resolved, we're going to see this pressure from China. In terms of the Ukraine part, I do think that we will see a long-term correction. People now talking about friendshoring, meaning that we should think harder about, trading more prominently with basically regimes and countries that we share values with, so that we are not exposed to the kind of blackmail that Europe currently is by the Russian regime.
And let me ask you, we're looking now at food banks, for example, having numbers that were unimaginable just a year ago. So groceries are becoming prohibitively expensive for people. At the same time, when you look at the real estate markets here in Germany, for example, in the U.S., they are hotter than ever. There is money. People are paying incredibly high prices for real estate. At the same time, we've got cases of people not being able to afford eggs and butter. How do you bring equilibrium back to that?
Well, I think we will see, at least in the U.S., I think we already see a calming down of the real estate market, unavoidably, because the Fed is going to massively increase interest rates. They are not talking about, multiple, even 50 basis points hikes. We will see whether that materializes. But we will see at the end of the year, we will see interest rates between 2 and 3%, and that will push up mortgage rates, and that will inevitably calm down the mortgage market. Europe will have that a little bit, but with a delay. Europe is just a little bit behind the curve. So I think we will see a calming down of the real estate market. But indeed, there's a problem of inequality. When I said we all got collectively poorer, it's now a political question. How are we going to sort of distribute the pain? There will be pain. There's no question that there will be pain. This is to extent unavoidable. The question now is, are we letting the most vulnerable in our economies suffer, or is it going to have to be paid by people that can probably afford it a bit more, which means we will have to increase transfers, social programs, to make sure that the most vulnerable in our society are not hit too much by this energy and food price hikes.
Yeah, when you use the word transfers, you know that is a hot political potato in the United States. You've got midterms coming up. In 2 years, you have a presidential election. What would be your advice to whoever is sitting in the White House? What should they do? I mean, we don't want to inflate the power of the executive branch anywhere to fix the economy, but what can the state, what can and should it do right now?
I think you would have to see a sort of a fiscally neutral redistribution program. In other words, not being expansionary as we were actually in COVID, which at least in the US, I think, contributed to part of the mess. So I think what you will have to see is you probably might want to send checks again to people that really are suffering, but you'll have to finance it by taxes on the rich. That's the really only sensible option that avoids contributing to inflation further, but also solving the distributional problems that we are currently facing. Otherwise, we might see social unrest.
Yeah, well, we'll see if that will, be able to win an election for some candidates in the U.S. Come this fall and in 2 years. Economist Rudiger Bachmann joining us from the great state of Indiana. We appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.